Hello, and welcome to the Behavior Education Connection, the podcast that works to connect the world of behavior analysis and the world of education. We focus on topics important to behavior analysts who work in the public schools and those who support them. Join us and spend time gaining insights and ideas as our host talks with fellow behavior analysts as well as other experts in the field. Hi, and welcome again to our newest episode of the Behavior Education Connection. I'm your host, Selena Layden, and I am excited to be joined by two guests today. Today we have Kay Carbo and Daria Lario-Barston, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, please. Kay, do you want to go first?
Hi. My name is Kay Carbaugh, and I go by she, her pronouns. I am an LCSW, so I've had some experience with private practice, especially children and adolescents, and I've been a school social worker for the last 16 years in Virginia schools. And now I teach future social workers at the college level. So I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad to have you. And we're going to talk about why you're here in just a second, because you are not our typical guest, but we are very happy to have you. Daria, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Daria Lario-Barston. I am a project specialist at the TTAC at William & Mary. I'm BCBA, and I get the pleasure of providing lots of technical assistance to teachers and behavior analysts in our school settings, and really anyone else who is willing to receive my help.
Well, thank you both for being here. I really appreciate it. So we're going to jump in, but we're talking today about working with school social workers and why would we ever want to do that? And there's lots of great reasons. And in full disclosure, I've had the privilege to work with both Kay and Daria for a really long time. And Kay was one of the school social workers that I worked with when I worked in a school setting. So let's jump right in. And I'm going to start by asking, what is a school social worker and why is that different from probably the social worker that comes to our brains when we think of the word social worker?
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak on that, because you're right. I think a lot of times, if you have not had an interaction with a school social worker, or that you know what their job entails, it has been up to the media to tell you, and the media is not very kind about what social workers are. I have never taken someone's child. I have never testified in court, anything like that. So school social workers are mental health professionals, and we're hired by the school districts. We're utilized in very different ways, though. And I think that's kind of a similarity between school social workers and BCBAs, that it really depends on the district that you're serving in, how you are utilized as support staff. But all school social workers are going to be utilized in two major areas. So the first is going to be completing those evaluations for special education evaluations. We're going to be looking at socioculturals. We're one of the only people on that multidisciplinary team that is able to not just talk about the student in the classroom or the student in the school building, but talk about the student from the lens of the parent, right? So we bring the parent's voice to the table with background information and developmental history and medical history, so that we're able to look at a whole child, right? So that's going to be part of what a school social worker does, is that special education process. The other thing that school social workers do is really work as a liaison between the family and the school and the community. And so how we do that is really, everything from when we look at Maslow, like basic level needs, right? So we work with our McKinney-Vento students that are currently unhoused or precariously placed and at risk of being unhoused. We try to get, food assistance, clothing assistance, transportation, things like that for our families, because we do know that assisting families is going to help the student have a place, of support that they're coming from into our schools each day. And so then the second thing, other than those basic needs, the second thing that we're going to be really focused on is, access to mental and behavioral health needs. And so we can do things like getting families support through parenting classes or through case management or through medication management. And the way that we do that is working through the Children's Services Act, or CSA, we are often the school representatives that sit on the FAPT team, which is the Family Assessment and Planning team. So we get a pot of money that is, for a community to be able to really work with and provide services for our most at-risk families and students. And then we're able to sit on those committees and see how that funding is going to play out.
I think that's a great explanation, and I think it's a broader one than a lot of us, even who work with school social workers, probably fully understand that role. And so, Daria, being our representative BCBA, why do we care about this? Why is this something that we should be thinking about and not just say, well, that's not our job. We don't need to worry about that, right?
Well, Selena, that's a great question. And I wanted to let Kay know that it's okay that you get a bad rep in the media. BCBAs are always sometimes kind of frowned upon
We've
as
had our
well.
share too
So,
at times.
Uh-huh.
one more thing we have in common between our two professions. So I think the reasons we are here together in this podcast and having this conversation is really because there's a wonderful opportunity and I would say necessity for interdepartmental collaboration, right? And when we are supporting our kids and our families, we really need to think of a broad picture and think about all the moving pieces. So sometimes we come in and we are really well versed in the behavior strategies, but when we don't know what the context is or what the family backgrounds or the histories that they may not share with us, not because they're withholding, but because it may not have occurred to them or they didn't think it was relevant or they don't know us yet, right? A multitude of reasons. But having that fuller picture that a social worker can help us think through and kind of help understand some of the social dynamics or help understand some of the family situations, it makes us much better equipped to actually pick out strategies and supports that are aligned to the family needs, not just on the surface level, but more at the kind of root cause. And so Selena, you mentioned that you had an opportunity to work with Kay, and I am delighted to be in the same, share that experience as well, because Kay and I worked together for several years in a school division. And there were many times that we sat around a table in meetings that at times were contentious, at times were charming and lovely and not contentious at all. But in all of those situations, we were able to arrive at a much better solution for the families because we were able to cross-pollinate our ideas, right? Because we were able to look at kind of the family situation from a variety of different perspectives. And so that collaboration was really powerful, not just to help us grow as professionals, but again, to find a much better fit for the families and the teachers and anybody who was supporting the student.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, and all of that's really important. And I think, as behavior analysts, we are being pushed in our field right now to really think about behavior a little bit more holistically, right? So not so procedurally necessarily. And one of the things that I think is really helpful by collaborating with school social workers, and having that insight into what's going on at home is I think it can help us develop better interventions in school and have a better insight into what those setting events are that may be impacting the behavior that we frankly wouldn't probably know about otherwise.
Well, and to add to that, I think we're in a really interesting temporal context right now, right? Where I know we all are so ready to stop talking about the COVID-19 pandemic, and we don't want to hear one more thing about it. But realistically speaking, it was an experience that in research literature has been dubbed to be collective trauma, right?
For
And
sure.
so while we had a lot of alarming patterns for our students before the pandemic occurred, we had some kids who really struggled with some self-regulation skills. We had some kids who really struggled with some behavioral skills or the lack thereof, right? We've had some of those patterns before the pandemic. But then during that collective trauma, all of those experiences and all of those patterns have exacerbated. And so
Mhm.
when we are thinking about the students and their families and the teachers and other educators, we're really looking at a little bit of a different profile of a learner now than
Mhm.
before the pandemic. And this is where I think we really have to leverage the expertise of other professionals who at times are better equipped or better trained to support mental wellness in our school settings than BCBA at times, right? So we are seeing the patterns now where we have so many more students who are really struggling with that self-regulation piece. I've had a teacher who I remember talking about a behavior training, and we were talking about escalating behavior. And I mentioned the good old adage of like, oh, the kid is going from 0 to 60 really quickly. And the teacher said, 0 to 60, I wish the kids come to us already at 100, right? And I thought, wow, that's a really interesting perspective. And then coupled with that, we know because the research has told us so, is that we've had such elevated levels of anxiety and stress and frustration during the COVID-19 pandemic. And even as we opened the doors and went back to in-person learning, those patterns are still holding, right? So the National Federation of Families have done their surveys. The Rethink First produced a report just a year ago, and all of them are showing those alarming trends with, again, that level of stress, that level of anxiety. And sometimes our solutions as BCBAs may be coming at it from one angle, but having expertise of a social worker like Kay is so more powerful to help kind of look at things from a different perspective as well.
Yeah, I agree. So one of the things I think about with COVID-19, and I don't have the data in front of me, but I will tell you anecdotally, I hear over and over again, our kindergartners are not coming to us ready to learn anymore.
Mhm.
And we had that before COVID-19 for sure. There were always those kids that didn't have school readiness skills. And I think now more than ever, we have a lot of kids that may be coming to us without having school readiness skills because, I think during COVID, we kind of held this belief that we're all going through the same storm or we're all in the same boat, so to speak, which I think we were all going through the same storm, but we were not all living in the same boat, right? Like some of us were living in yachts and some of us were living in rowboats and some of us may have been holding onto the plank in the water, treading as fast as we could.
Right.
And our students had those same experiences, right? We had students that were in great homes and had dedicated learning spaces and parental support. And then we had kids who were still at daycare, who were surrounded by 12 other kids who were virtual learners. And then we had kids who, what, you want me to get on a computer? Like, that's just not even, like, my parents can't make that happen right now for a variety of reasons. Um, and those things we don't just overcome them in 2 days. And so mental
Mhm.
wellness and behavioral health is really an area that is going to manifest itself into the behaviors that we see within schools. Um, so
Yeah.
I know that wasn't necessarily what we were talking about, but I do think it's a really important point that you bring
Well,
up.
but it is to go with a, sea and water analogy. It's all hands on deck kind of situation, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's where we are. And I think about, so a big part of my work at TTAG is supporting school divisions with their MTSS implementation. And I feel like now I think about everything in the shape of a triangle, right? But I think about the tier one, tier two, tier three supports where there's a universal practice for everybody that's just good practice, then a few or some kids need some additional supports, and then a few need some more intensified individualized supports, right? And when
And
I
not
think
to
about,
interrupt, but that's kind of where BCBAs tend to live, right?
right,
I mean, we
Mhm.
encourage always that they're not living in that tier three all the time, but that is the reality of where our field tends to live in schools.
well,
Mhm.
and what has happened recently is that our triangles have almost flipped and become more of tornado shape than a
Right.
triangle shape, where we have so many more kids who are struggling with that behavioral piece, with that mental wellness piece, that it cannot be just BCBAs treating things on an individual level because the need is so great.
And I think that's why the importance for trauma informed, schools, communities is so important, right? Because we need to be able to collaborate together. We do have more kids coming into us, more families coming into us with higher levels of need. I think that when we were in the pandemic, all of us were like, okay, just can't wait to get back to normal. The issue with that is that we are never going to be what we were in 2019. We're never
Yes.
going to be February of 2020 anymore. We are creating our own new norms. And it's really important then that we have this opportunity to be able to shape what are those new norms, right? How do we collaborate together? How do we make sure that our spaces are safe for kids, that we don't have to know what their trauma is? We just need to know that we are a safe space, creating that relationship and treating every child as if they did have a trauma, that they are walking through our doors. We can, just mentally prepare and say, yeah, what if something did happen this morning or last night to this child? And I think that gives us more empathy and understanding, and also fosters a greater desire for us to collaborate together, because we can't do this on our own, right?
Yeah, and on that point, I actually want to kind of delve deeper into that. So I'm guessing a lot of our listeners right now are thinking, well, yeah, I have a school social worker. Like I see them at meetings every once in a while, but I don't really know them very well. Or maybe you're BFFs, but I'm betting that you're not working together in a very collaborative way. And so, what are some tips or thoughts around how BCBAs and school social workers could better collaborate to have more effective outcomes for our kids?
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest thing is knowing that no positive or negative experience happens in a vacuum for a student, for a class, for a family. It's not just one isolated event that is positive or negative, right? It is because of systems. It is because of parts moving together that have a domino effect. And so I think that collaboration then is so important in understanding that, one person can't redo or undo a setting event for a student, and one person can't, make the decisions for that student. It really is in tandem that we are all working together and trying to collaborate. So I think just an awareness that you do have a school social worker, that we as schools have support staff that all need to be networking together, for the benefit of our kids.
Yeah, and I think, as behavior analyst, and this doesn't change. I can't probably change what happened at home, right? I don't have that stimulus control or that ability to reach over that barrier. I can only control what happens in the environment I have. But knowing what was going on in that environment, or knowing that something is going on in that environment or has in the past, may absolutely have a lot of impact on the decisions I make around what kind of interventions are appropriate for the student. And so I think being able to have that communication with that school social worker and say, you know, something seems different or something's not right, or we've noticed a lot of change in behavior. Um, can you help us? Can you help us kind of put the puzzle together about what might be going on so that we can create better interventions for these students?
So, the other part, Celine, is I think when we think about collaboration with anybody, it comes down to the same principles, right? Building relationship is the foundation of any good collaboration. And yes, hypothetically speaking, you don't have to be BFFs with a school social worker, although I did become BFFs with mine. Highly recommend it. However, it all starts with the same ideas of validating and affirming each other's expertise, right? Because sometimes BCBAs and social workers do look at lived experiences and events from different perspectives.
Mhm,
And we are
for sure.
really great at jumping straight into what's the function of the behavior, right? And
Mhm.
our school social workers are really great at telling us, okay, hold on, slow down, take a breather before you do that. Let's kind of think about all the other contributing factors. And did you know that, this family had this kind of experience? Did you know that this family is looking for permanent housing right now? All of those different contributing factors. And so together, again, we can collaborate really well, but it takes a lot of authentic and respectful conversations and the willingness to listen to each other's perspective and remain curious about each other's field, right? We may not always agree. We may not even always agree about which interventions would be the best fit for a family or a student. However, when we can agree that we are there for the kids and we have their best interests at heart, then all of those conversations become really productive conflict in a way that helps us manipulate and kind of think through the solutions and arrive at a much better place. So I think being able to listen to one another and purposefully seek each other's perspective is a really powerful starting point. So for anybody who's listening and who is thinking, well, yes, I think I know who our social worker is, but I don't know that we ever really had a long, drawn out conversation. It might be a great starting point when you have a little bit of free time.
Well, and you bring up a really important point, which is different disciplines have different training, right? As a BCBA, we have one set of training. As a school social worker, okay, you have a different set of training and courses and internships and all the things you had to do to get your license. And I think with that comes the ability for us to think about how do we grow in our own scope of competence. And as we are having more and more children who are having mental wellness and behavioral health challenges or needs, we are going to be pushed to grow in our scope of competence. And so, as behavior analysts, it's part of our ethics that we find mentorship. And while other BCBAs are great mentors, and we absolutely should have them, and we should build our network. And if nothing else that you get from this podcast, that is always what we talk about. But I think growing your network outside of our field also can help us. Not to say do stuff that's outside of our scope of practice. We absolutely should not be doing that. But how can we take some of the things that school social workers, school counselors, school psychologists, others that we're going to collaborate with are trained to do and incorporate that into our own interventions or help generalize some of the skills that kids are learning or some of those other pieces? And I think that that's a great opportunity that comes with this kind of collaboration.
Absolutely. And I think that there's a real opportunity to be able to collaborate and stay in our own lanes, right? We're not
Yes.
going to step on each other's toes, but also hold space for exactly what you said, Selena, different backgrounds, different trainings, different understandings, and different vantage points from which we're coming to see these children. So yeah, I think that there's such effective collaboration that can happen, that there's not one right way to look at a student or an issue or a behavior. It's really in this multidisciplinary team approach that we're going to be able to best address challenges, but also the strengths that each individual student, family, teacher brings to the table as well.
I think as professionals, right? I think our scope of practice as BCBAs and the scope of practice for school social workers, I think of as a Venn diagram with a whole
Absolutely.
lot of things in the middle,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
I think when we look at it kind of holistically, our professional values from both professions are really similar, right? We
Mhm.
are there to make sure that our students are as successful as they can be in a really supportive and inclusive environment. And so the other parts that are the outside hanging out on the Venn diagram, those are details and they are important aspects of our profession. But I think if we can remain grounded and remember just how many things we have in common, I think it's going to help us be much more effective in the ways that we collaborate with one another and leverage each other's expertise because we're going in the same direction of helping our students.
Mhm.
It's just those other little pieces that we're not always in alignment. Well, that's okay because that's life.
Well, and it's not just the alignment. I think there's the other pieces. There are parts of a school social worker's job that are not within a school-based behavior analyst job and vice versa. But I also I remember having conversations with Kay where I'm like, we're really struggling with this kid, but I know that they don't have food at home. Like, how can we
Mhm.
connect them with the community? Because I can't solve that at school.
Right.
That's not a school solvable issue, but it is a place where we have school personnel that can help connect
Mhm.
our families to the community better and community resources that are available. Or, as kids get older and they're moving into transition, the family doesn't really know how to connect with adult services. I don't really know all the ins and outs of that either, but our school social workers can be a really valuable tool to do some of those things. And that is really part of our job, is to ensure our students have the resources that they need to be
Mhm.
successful, even though we may not be the ones who can move the levers to get those resources in the right place. But our school social worker absolutely can be one of those right levers to get those resources in the right place for those students and for those families. So with
Okay.
that, we're coming towards the end of our episode. I'm hearing first step, identify your school social worker
Number one.
and go meet them. Shake their
Yes.
hand, say, hi, this is who I am. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about what you do. And I will tell you, I have never worked with a school social worker who refuses to sit down and explain what they do or sit down and have a conversation about what they're willing to do or be part of. I find them all to be very helpful and lovely, wonderful people who really do. I mean, I don't think you go into social work because you think you're going to be the next millionaire, obviously, just like teachers, just like, many of us in human service fields. You go into these fields because you want to help kids or you want to help the people that you're working with. And so do our school social workers. So figure out who they are, go talk to them. Any other last minute thoughts, tips, ideas for our listeners?
I appreciate that Venn diagram analogy, right? Because it is so important. We all have different expertise and different ways that we are doing this, but our connection and our why is all the same, right? We are all in these schools to be able to help students with achieving opportunities for success. And so just continuing to remember our why and that our why is the same. Also acknowledging that, your school social worker can absolutely foster the work that you are already doing with your relationships with kiddos and with teachers. We don't have a magic wand and we can't create more housing or things like that, but we absolutely can connect with those resources that students and families may need. So, yeah.
And I would say, I love Selena, step 1, meet your social worker. Step 2, talk to them. I would say step 3, put regular check-ins on your calendar to circle back to that social worker, right? To talk about things, because you're right, you never know. You don't know what you don't know. So you don't know what supports might be there for families. And the social workers may not know which families need them sometimes. And it's having this ongoing conversation of being able to share some of your professional challenges with one another, or coming to one another with, again, that place of curiosity and saying, hey, I'm not quite sure what to do with this family, right? When you're able to problem solve together, you're able to come out with such better, richer perspectives that I think that's really important to make time to have those regularly scheduled check-ins with social workers. And if things are going brilliantly, well, then you can share a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or a beverage of your choice together and build that relationship for the future.
And I think it also doesn't have to be just BCBAs and school social workers, because all the support staff is going to need to have those check-ins. And the schools that I have worked with that have had the most understanding and adoption of trauma-informed care have been the ones that have really seen that collaboration as vital and then made space for it. So scheduling a monthly meeting that is like a mental health check-in or something like that with your administrators and your BCBA and your school psychologist and your school counselors, being able to talk through those cases that may not, have IEPs or may not have BIPs or FBAs yet. Being able to talk through those students' needs and collaborate and have a set time each month, I think is a really great opportunity. So yeah, I would encourage that if you don't have something like that in your schools now, you could be that person to bring that to your administrator and say, hey, is this something that we're interested in? Because it's only our kiddos that will benefit.
Absolutely. Wonderful ideas. And I'm always a fan for kind of taking that leadership role within your role. So I like all of those ideas. Kay and Daria, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a really good conversation, and a conversation that I think really I encourage our listeners to think about and continue this conversation, not just about school social workers, but about all related service personnel and all the people that touch the lives of children every day. So thank you, ladies, very much for being with me today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us, and thanks for making space to have these conversations. And to those of you who are listening, thanks for listening and engaging with us this way.
Yes, and I echo that. Thank you to our listeners for joining us today, and I hope we will see you on our next episode.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Behavior Education Connection. Join us next time for another great conversation about behavior analysis in the schools. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on an episode. Sending out a special thanks to the Virginia Department of Education for supporting our work. We look forward to connecting with you all again soon.